Well, coming up, we recap the State of the Nation Address debate. We'll take you to our reporter Molemo Waone Mutwa, who is at the cemetery where rapper Keenan Forbes will be laid to rest. And tributes continue to pour in for Black consciousness leader Peter Soul Jones. Well, a very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we are live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, with myself, Liesl Wilson. You're watching the Week in Review. Let's take a look at some of those big stories that came into the week ahead, perhaps what made headlines and has kept South Africans talking. Right, so our first story includes rapper Keenan Forbes, who is currently being laid to rest today in Johannesburg. Forbes and his friend Tebelo Motsoane were shot and killed in Durban last Friday. SABC News reporter Molemo Waone Mutwa and video journalist Sia Mhlongo are covering the story. Perhaps will also give us an update on the end. A very good afternoon to you, Molemo. Thank you for your time. Perhaps you can just walk us through what has transpired today on the back of the private funeral that was being held for the Forbes family, and where you currently are, what really is happening as we speak.
Good afternoon. Indeed, we are still here in Johannesburg outside Cemetery Park, where the final remains of Keenan Forbes, known as AKA, are going to be laid to rest. We actually have just witnessed a procession, funeral procession, which was led by a hearse, which is carrying a coffin in which his body, is laying. As we know that, this signals that, the curtains are now coming down on this chapter. As we've witnessed a week ago, South Africans waking up to the news of a brutal murder of the hip-hop rapper outside a popular restaurant in Johannesburg, where he was fatally shot with his friend Tebelo Motsoane. And of course, both families, have expressed, their wishes to, hold private funeral services for their loved ones. But if I can just step out, of the camera, if you see behind there, you can see there some members of the JMPD, which have been here since morning to control and oversee traffic here. We actually, have been made to understand that the funeral is not going to be a provincial a special provincial funeral, as it was the Premier's wish before. We know that he requested from the President to have the rapper granted a provincial special funeral, but that request was denied by the President. However, we understand that the province is actually, or has afforded the family law enforcement personnel. They've afforded them the flag, which they are going to use, to drape the coffin. And the Premier, in assisting, we heard him saying that, clarifying, the fact that even though they are assisting, it's not, the contribution actually is not a monetary, is not going to be in monetary forms. But as we saw yesterday, at a memorial service for AKA, which was held here in Johannesburg, industry colleagues as well as friends sharing memories of the rapper throughout his career during that service yesterday. And just to maybe quote a few of them, we heard JR, who is a producer as well, as a musician, saying that he can't recall how he met AKA. However, one moment, which, stood out in the relationship is when AKA was accompanying him to Durban for a show. He said the relationship grew and ultimately, culminated into a long romance, for the city of Durban, which he said now he finds it difficult to understand as to the very city that, he loved so dearly, is the one that has taken him away, from all of them. And we also heard DJ Tira as well, who is a musician as well, saying that, or rather lamenting, the high levels of crime in this country, saying that something needs to be done and that, the rapper's voice will remain and will not die. But then he actually highlighted the fact that it's not about the death of a celebrity, but about the safety of everyone, who resides in this land. And we also heard Kabelo Mabalani, who is a pastor, as well as who had been a spiritual mentor for the hip-hop star, saying that during their last cell group meeting, he actually made a prayer request where he asked to be prayed for his forthcoming album to be a success. And as we are speaking right now, the family has proceeded inside the cemetery, where now the final service is going to be now concluded.
Molemo, thank you very much for that update. As it transpires, perhaps as there's more updates, we'll continue to get the latest from you. Molemo Maona Mutwa, outside the Cemetery Park in Johannesburg, just giving us an update. West Park Cemetery, in fact, on the back of rapper AKA's hearse having arrived. We understand that the private funeral ceremony is currently underway there, where he will be laid to rest. All right, so other news making headlines this week. Police Minister Bheki Cele has described the latest crime statistics as not painting a positive picture of crime fighting in the country. Cele released the statistics for the period between October and December last year, which showed an increase in various categories of contact crimes.
A gloomy picture of crime in the country. Police recorded an increase in incidents of crime during the third quarter of 2022-23 financial year compared to the same quarter in the previous year. About 700 more murder cases were reported to the police, mostly committed with guns and knives, while about 1,100 more people were raped, most of them in homes. Attempted murder, common assault and assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm also increased by thousands of incidents. Common robbery shot up by more than 2,200.
Mass shootings is a worry, I wouldn't lie. But what you are not also adding is that we do arrest. We have good results in arresting people.
6 police stations have recorded the highest number of murders. They are in 3 provinces. Police say they are cracking down on gang-related crime.
Quite a number of gang groupings that we've taken down, which those cases are currently in court, and we're still going to take many other gangs down within this year. But the challenge now is the breeding ground that is there for the gangs. As you take up this leadership, then you will see the flare or the increase in gang violence.
Meanwhile, police say no arrest has been made in connection with the murder of rapper AKA as the investigation continues.
We're still putting our evidence together in order for us to be able to have a solid case going forward. The identification of those that were seen on videos that you might have seen on social media, it's something that we cannot disclose now, but we've got an idea as to who might those people be.
Cele says police have also destroyed more than 65,000 illegal firearms and fired rogue cops as part of attempts to clean up the police service.
He says the campaign to detect and remove illegal firearms and ammunition is being intensified, whilst legislation to address the availability of guns in communities is underway. Lula Mamatya, SABC News, Parliament.
Meanwhile, members of Parliament debated President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address this week. This was followed by the president's reply. Most MPs described Ramaphosa's new dawn as a false dawn, characterized by a rudderless country which is going from bad to worse. However, the president was quick to rebut this characterization during his reply by trying to reassure the nation that the country was on a path of progressive renewal.
A robust and heated debate. This as ANC MPs rallied behind Ramaphosa as opposition parties tore apart his plan of action for the country. The recurring theme was the ongoing rolling blackouts and the energy crisis. The DA has threatened to take government to court over the declaration of the national state of disaster. ANC Chief Whip fired the first preemptive strike at the opposition.
A lot of hot air is going to be blown about the government declaration of a national state of disaster to respond to the electricity crisis and its effects. The critics of this approach miss the most important element of the intervention, namely the strong central coordination and decisive action needed to deal with the national crisis of energy.
But the DA said it would not back down.
We have no other option as the Democratic Alliance but to challenge this latest state of disaster in court, if only to prevent an even bigger disaster.
The Mineral Resources and Energy Minister tried to expose the DA's contradiction on the issue of the declaration of the state of national disaster.
January 2023, the leader of the Democratic Alliance made a bold statement that will support declaration of the state of disaster on the emergency and the energy crisis. That was the 31st of January. Then when the state of disaster was declared on the 9th of February, the same leader of the Democratic Alliance came back and said, we'll take the government to court for declaring a state of disaster.
The DA also described President Cyril Ramaphosa as worse than his predecessor, Jacob Zuma.
As we look back now on that early period of the Ramaphosa presidency, through the lens of this year's State of the Nation address, we arrive at one inescapable conclusion: that you, Mr. President, are somehow guilty of something even worse than the thing that you once accused Zuma of. For if President Zuma presided over 9 wasted years, you, sir, have presided over 5 disastrous years.
But the EFF leader was less than polite in his scathing attack on the president.
Our country is in the middle of several man-made crises. The man who's currently at the center of South Africa's crisis is a full-time businessman, animals trader, possibly a puppet of both the domestic and global capitalist interest, who has said that the job of president for him is a part-time job, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa.
The IFP warned of a possible social unrest if the current problems facing the country are not addressed.
But if you ask anyone on the street what defines us, they would say load shedding, unemployment and crime, amongst other things. You are right that we are not people easily resigned to our fate. But there is a warning in that. How long will it be before you have a revolution on your hands? And believe me, it will not be a silent revolution.
The Freedom Front Plus blamed affirmative action for Eskom's problems.
It is common knowledge that black economic empowerment and affirmative action is one of the main reasons for the problems in Eskom. Their own employment equity plan determines that in the next 3 years, Eskom must get rid of 500 white men technicians with technical skills.
The UDM accused the ANC of being a beneficiary of questionable deals.
For example, the country has been delivered into the grips of load shedding, whilst corruption has chewed all the money that was meant to develop the power generating infrastructure of South Africa. Certainly, Mr. President, the ruling party on this one had benefited through Hitachi and Chancellor House deals.
The EFF and Police Minister were also at loggerheads over various matters.
The Honorable Mr. Steenhuisen, to say, Mr. Steenhuisen, want to hear you apologizing to abuse a young woman who came to work in your office and was a wife of your colleague, and you took that wife of your colleague. You divorced your own wife, and you took that young girl. She is your wife today, but the women around you are quiet, are not saying anything, and you come in this podium, you talk about gender-based violence.
We cannot sit here and allow the minister to abuse the wife of the leader of the opposition in the name of fighting GBV. That is a woman abuse what he did here and cannot be accepted. He must be called to order and to withdraw that.
Cele's remarks were ruled unparliamentary.
I must indicate that Honorable Cele had already sent a message that he wishes to withdraw and apologize for the remarks he made. This was before I received a letter from the DA on the same matter. I now recognize Honorable Minister Cele.
I withdraw.
We must say that bullies and stormtroopers of the opposition have only mastered one thing: debate should never be given a chance. A master's degree should teach us that in order to lead, we should listen to those whom we disagree instead of raising frivolous points of order.
On day 2, opposition parties were not letting down the political pressure as the ANC stood its ground.
As an international standard, the rule of law and good governance are fundamental for global investment. Mr. President, on this front, only the blind will fail to see how you have invested more energies and resources in strengthening and repurposing the criminal justice system in line with its constitutional mandate.
Rising unemployment, the deteriorating state of municipalities, rampant corruption and crime also came under the spotlight.
South Africans want results, Mr. President, not more broken promises. And this is what they will vote for in 2024, a party that delivers results.
You political parties, you lock yourself in a room and cut the cake according to what is your interest. At the time, community is outside, locked outside there. When the service delivery is not rendered, the blame goes to municipality. And we are calling to government and calling to parliament to act on this because it's a problem that is going to be with us for a very long time. Our people need service, they don't want politicking.
And what is clear, Mr. President, is that every time your ministers don't perform, instead of firing them, you protect them by taking things into the presidency. Be decisive, Mr. President. Fire them. Don't have a nanny cabinet. I'll see you name.
The leader of the ACDP, whose wife passed last month, thanked the president for coming to sympathize personally and spending time with the family during their time of bereavement. He said his wife was most concerned about the high levels of crime, especially violations against women and children and blackouts in the country.
Mr. President, it is very unfortunate to know that the unreliable Eskom of today used to be the #1 power utility in the world.
But due to those who are seeking bribes, those who are trying to extort
the people who awarded that bid. The car power ships cannot be plugged into the grid to now ameliorate the energy crisis that we have. The reality is that in the immediate, you have got no any other solution except plugging in the FSRUs from Turkey, from China, and from the Russian Federation. That is one of the immediate things that we must have to deal with.
It was left to the Justice Minister to do the sweeping on behalf of the governing party.
They came here to present their election manifesto. They were not here to present solutions to the people of this country. In fact, the Commander-in-Chief or the Supreme Leader of the EFF even presented the state of the city of Johannesburg. Honorable Shivambu has just left here, attempted to present some ideas. But unlike, and I'm very disappointed with Honorable Shivambu, because almost like Honorable Steenhuisen quoted his hero, P.W. Botha, without acknowledging him on the Rubicon speech.
What became clear from the marathon debate was that there is still disagreement between the ruling party and the opposition benches on how best to resolve problems facing the country. Ulelani Philip, SABC News.
All right, so for more on this, we're joined by political analyst Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Breakfast. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Thank you very much for having me.
So we saw the clip, but just highlighting, briefly what happened during the week. And I wonder how you'd weigh in really on what came out this week. The declaration of the energy crisis as the national state of disaster also came to the fore, load shedding, the reform agenda at large. How would you weigh in on what transpired?
Yeah, I think, what we have seen of late has been a change for the West as opposed to the change for the better. I don't think that many South Africans found comfort in the responsiveness of the president. If you look at, for instance, unemployment, it is sitting at 32%, and it is worse amongst the youth. And that is a narrow definition. If you can use the expanded definition, it could be worse. If you look at the pervasiveness of the haves and the have-nots, it has also increased. If you look at poverty, it is also worse. So I think, the electoral outcomes of the upcoming general elections are going to be very interesting, because I think that's the power that lies with the electorate.
Speaking of which, the president then obviously came out and admitted that load shedding, crime, interruptions of other municipal services were really weighing citizens down, and then committed further to addressing these issues decisively over the next year. So just on the back of what you said, questions about trust and integrity amongst the people and in the administration obviously come up. How would you weigh in on whether South Africans trust and believe that the SONA debate response by the president is going to yield the results they need?
Yeah, I think trust is broken down. I think government has not honored its commitments in terms of improving the lives of the people qualitatively, given the fact that the majority of South Africans are on the margins of the economy. And it doesn't look like things are going to change even in future. So I think the social contract has not been honored by the government of the day, because you must remember, people vote for their government of the day, and in response to that, the government of the day has to get the job done, but our government has dropped the ball in terms of promoting qualitative improvement of the lives of the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about the social contract not being adhered to at this point, we've heard the opposition parties then calling for the president to resign. What are your thoughts at this juncture?
No, there's no way you can give in to that demand. But I think the elections are just around the corner.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying the turn of events is going to be very interesting. I think the trend, has been coalition formations, but I'm not sure if it is legitimate as of now to make that demand for the president to give in to what the opposition parties are demanding from him.
Well, we're speaking about the timing, the critical timing of what all is transpiring, and on the back of the response from the president. I mean, were you happy with the president's response to the questions posed during the debate? And because this really is the 7th year that this has occurred, I mean, we're obviously looking at the necessary change that's needed, but we're also headed into elections, so priorities are going to shift.
Yeah, I think he's very good in making speeches, but it's all talk and no action. You see, that's the problem. I mean, when he was making his speech of the SONA, he also reflected on what had happened before, but his government has not been successful in terms of achieving its intended objectives. And we know that there are 3 security threats which are posing a danger to the country, to our democracy, and that is inequality, poverty, and unemployment. And those things are still at the heart of the country. You know, they are still posing a threat to our democracy.
Yeah. So speaking of which, we've seen the ripple effects of the decisions. We've seen the state of South Africa. Yesterday, the crime stats were also released. And it's obviously reflecting the socioeconomic conditions and perhaps what is needed at this point. I wonder how you'd weigh in on what transpired there. We saw murders up by 10.1%, rape up by 9.8%. How worrisome is that also?
Well, I mean, obviously, crime is a security threat. It is also posing a danger to national security. I think crime cannot be fought only by SABC. It requires a collective effort. I think you have to have a partnership between communities and also police officers, what is known as community police partnerships. I think that is a trend on a global scale at the moment, because criminal activities are happening in communities, and it's the community members who know the people who are breaking the law. Therefore, they have to work side by side with those who are in positions of power in terms of providing safety and security.
So when we look at, you know, how the events of the past week transpired, we saw some jabs and domestic abuse accusations being traded and being politicized. And I wonder, you know, I wonder how you'd also reflect on those dynamics that emerged during the week and really what's being reflected on that front.
Yeah, you know what, I want to be very careful. I want to be very circumspect. I don't want to come across as if I'm taking sides. Suffice to say, you know, in politics, sometimes politicians, they go on the offensive and others, they go on the defensive. So I think, you know, the ruling party thought that the opposition parties were taking a swipe at them, and no wonder they responded the way they did. But I don't think that, you know, people should politicize issues of gender-based violence or the violation of human rights of women. Those are serious issues. I don't think that people in general should play politics with those issues.
Yeah, it's exactly, because the lived reality is dire for a lot of South Africans. But just very quickly, in the interest of time, I need to wrap up. I wanted to just look at the opposition to date. We're seeing, you know, the DA leader, acting DA leader, John Steenhuisen, you know, saying that the party wants to engage more in policy rather than continuing to bash the ANC. So it's all fair and well that, you know, we're opposing what they've done. But the thing is, what are the solutions on the table? What ideas are being offered on that front? How would you weigh in on the role of the opposition as well to date, and what their contribution is as we look for change?
Yeah, I think opposition parties in this country, they are fragmented. They don't function as a unit. They don't function as a unified force. And that gives the ruling party, though it is not doing well, an upper hand, you know, because it looks like, I mean, coalition formations are going to be with us a bit longer. So I'm just thinking now, what is going to happen if the ruling party is voted out of power and then a coalition formation has to be formed on a large scale or on the national scale, but opposition parties cannot run municipalities together on a smaller scale.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, we've run out of time, so I'm going to have to leave the conversation there. But thank you very much for weighing on the back of what transpired this week. Political analyst Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, you're commenting on what we saw this week, members of parliament debating President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. That was obviously followed by the president's reply. We also saw the release of the crime stats this week, really weighing on what the impact that has had on the country to date and where to from here as we head and edge closer to the 2024 general elections. Again, thank you very much for his time here on the SABC. So we'll leave that conversation there, take a quick ad break. There is more on the other side upon our return. We'll be right back. Right, welcome back. The week in review with myself, Liesl Wilson, continues. On a somber note, tributes continue to pour in for Black consciousness leader Peter Cyril Jones, who passed away on Wednesday at his Pringle Bay home in the Western Cape after suffering a stroke. Now, the struggle veteran was the last Black person to see Steve Biko alive. We're back in 1977. Jones and Biko, who were both leaders of the Black People's Convention, were arrested at a roadblock near Grahamstown. They were separated shortly afterwards, and he only learned much later of Biko's death. Jones later joined AZAPO and once led AZAPO as its vice president, but he since lived to the age of 72. Perhaps to reflect on his time and legacy, we're joined by Veli Mbele Sompisi, Afrocentric essayist, as well as the co-founder of the Black Power Front and Mutapa Afrocentric Dialogues, to further weigh in on that. A very good afternoon to you, Veli. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. Always a pleasure.
Veli, we obviously going to reflect on the life and times, look at his legacy, its impact, and perhaps also the trajectory of BCM at large as an ideology and its relevance in South Africa. But I think on a personal note, when you heard of the passing, about the news of Peter Cyril Jones, what came to mind, and how were you feeling at that point upon receiving the tragic news?
Yes, I was in Cape Town at the time, right, where he is based and his family is based. So I received the news on the evening of his passing, and I was by myself at the time. And, you know, like any person that I have known and had a connection with, the immediate feeling was one of disbelief, you know, just shock. And with a much of time after speaking to some of his peers, you know, who are the elders in AZAPO, like Ubabu Monelo Bongo, and then later the pain of, you know, his passing began to set in, right? And like I said, you know, if you have known a person like I have known him, I know the sound of his voice, have seen him speak, you know, have heard him laugh, right? And to now come to terms with the reality that he's no more. But also you are somebody that contributed to my leadership and political development and that of many others of my generation in the Black consciousness movement. So at this stage, to be honest, it's something that we are still processing, right, to try and make sense of.
Well, speaking of his influence that he had on you, and obviously as you're processing what's just transpired, I mean, a giant has fallen upon the news. We're still taking it all in. And I wonder, in your opinion, what do you think we should be doing to honor his legacy? How should we be remembering at this point?
Yeah, so Baba Peter Jones, like you say, is a giant. You know, this is somebody who is a national liberation hero, right? Although he is a product of the Black consciousness movement and organizations like AZAPO, but is essentially a national liberation hero for each and every Black person, not just in South Africa, but actually globally, right? If you just look at his own perspective, but also his contribution, and so his significance, it far surpasses, you know, the fact that he was a native to South Africa. And it is also important to understand that he was part of a generation of young Black people who were in their 20s and decided in the 70s, early 70s, that they are going to change the engagement with the colonial slash apartheid regime, and that they are going to become more radical. And what they sought to achieve was to move black people away from what I call beggar tactics, right? Because they understood that you can't appeal to the conscience of an oppressor because an oppressor has no conscience. And so you must engage the oppressor on your own terms. And they did this. So he risked not only his own life, but they also forsook his youth and the life that he would have ordinarily had he pursued an ordinary life. So he sacrificed quite a lot in his 20s, and he represents that generation of those people who have made that kind of a contribution.
Yes, and perhaps to understand where we're headed, we need to look back at where we come from. We're looking at where South Africa currently is, the crisis on multiple fronts. And the issue of leadership also comes to the fore. What lessons can we learn from him in his life and times, perhaps as we navigate and charter these unprecedented times?
So one of the big lessons that we learn from people like Baba Peter Jones, right, is to understand, right, the importance of the fundamental question of who are our actual leaders and who are the people who pretend to be our leaders, right? And when I say who are we, I'm referring to black people, the oppressed, the people who have been involved in a liberation struggle, because those are the people that he represented. So the reason why he is important is that he also helps us understand who our actual leaders are and who are the people who pretend to be our leaders, right? But also the question that you raise as to also what leadership is about, right? That leadership is not celebrity status, right, or popularity, but leadership is service, it's sacrifice, it is honesty, it is integrity, right? And he represents and embodied all of those elements. Then there's another important thing that he also represents, which is a fundamental tragedy that characterizes South Africa today. For us to have a sense of history, right, and a sense of who we are, because a lot of times when we try and understand why things are the way they are in our country today, it is primarily because we have failed, right, to inform ourselves on our actual history, right? And we continue to be fed, right, a history that has absolutely no relevance to who we are as a people and what is fundamental to us. So those were some of the authentic ideals for which he stood for, and for which he was tortured, brutally tortured, when he was in detention, right? Because often people just talk about him as the last black person to have seen Biko alive. You know, he was a leader in his own right. He was Biko's peer. He was Biko's colleague, right? And I was just talking to one of his colleagues and peers, Baba Panipichane, this week, who was telling me that actually part of the plan was actually for him to also be killed, right? That same, during the same period that Biko was killed. So he would have also have been killed because he was actually amongst the most feared leaders of the Black Consciousness movement at the time by the apartheid system.
Veli, thank you for joining us, paying our respects to the passing of Peter Cyril Jones. I mean, in your article, you've also written about he was the last black person to see Steve Biko alive. We're also looking at the implications of what this means for the Black Consciousness movement at large as an ideology navigating, what's to come. But we'll have to leave the conversation there. Thank you for joining us again. We heard that tributes continue to pour in for Black Consciousness leader Peter Cyril Jones. He passed away on Wednesday at his Pringle Bay home in the Western Cape. We saw Afrocentric essayist and co-founder of the Black Power Front, Veli Mbele Gasompisi, weighing in and really reflecting on his impact that he had as we navigated into liberation, but perhaps also where to from here for the consciousness movement at large. We also going to take a look at some other stories now further afield on the continent. We know the African Union is holding its summit, and just before we chat to international consultant Dr. Charles Sinkala. News just in, we saw that the M23 rebel movement in the eastern DRC has denied attacking the UN peacekeeping helicopter, where the South African National Defence soldier Vusi Mabena was killed by snipers. Now, in an exclusive interview with our international news editor Sophie Mukwena, Lawrence Kanuka, M23 political spokesperson, has called on the international community to send an investigation team to investigate what he calls the unfolding genocide in the eastern DRC, where the government forces are fighting with the rebels. Take a look.
We give condolences to the family of the deceased and to the nation of South Africa. Really, it's appalling, dreadful really, to see a DRC government, irresponsible behavior of the DRC government, because we are not in the area the helicopter was shot. We are not in that area. It is been known. That's why until today, even the MONUSCO themselves can't point the fingers on the M23. We are not nearby. Everybody knows how far we are. So this is conducted by the DRC government coalition, which have FDLR inside and mercenary within that groups. So they have different kind of weapon. So it's not something the M23 should answer for that somebody's been dead and killed. But this is something the DRC government should come in and tell this coalition to stop. This is what we always say all the time. They shoot at the plane the same way they bring the plane to shoot and shell our people. Every single day we have many people wounded, killed, displaced by the DRC government bombing, using heavy artillery on population, heavy populated area, without actually having a concern of the human life. This dreadful episode of somebody being killed on the field is not anything to answer of. It's the DRC government should answer, because it's the one covering those areas.
And as we wrap up, what is your message to the United Nations, the SADC region, and East Africa community that the DRC has recently joined? And also in terms of the forces from East Africa who are in the DRC, what is your message? How do we stop this carnage? Because when we look at the DRC, this is a country that can feed the entire continent. It can also supply electricity to the continent. We look at children in the mines are being abused. This is a country that is supposed to be a diamond, a jewel of Africa.
Thank you very much. My message to the national community as a whole, as I may say, because there are many parties involved in this national community. All I'm trying to say, first of all, is for them to intervene and stop the ongoing genocide in the North Kivu at the moment, and Kivu in the Minembwe, and Ituri killing the Emma. So I want them to intervene. Why? Because the 1994 genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi, Rwanda, started the same way, with the hate speech, propaganda, and you have community apartheid. This is what's happening in the DRC today, driven by the own DRC government and killed by the people that's supposed to protect them. So I'm asking the international community, there's no point to talk about M23, do this, M23, do that. Intervene and stop the ongoing genocide happening in the east of Congo at the moment, perpetrated by the DRC government own coalition forces, which is embedded in FDLR. The group called Nyatura is in Congo. There's another called APLS in Congo. You have the Mai Mai, and you have, at the same time, the mercenary. So these people are killing Congolese, and the international community don't oversee this kind of stuff because of politics and country interest. We don't want to live again 1994 in Congo, in general, and in the Great Lake of Africa in particular. Basically, I'm asking for the leaders to ask the DRC government to stop its warmongering option, to sit on table, to talk through face to face, and address the root causes of the conflict, to stop the repetition of war of Congo. Because if we don't stop it, we still have problems in the country where in Kwamutu, there's the similar kind of ethnic problem happening in Kwamutu. Nobody says anything about it. All the attention is being given to the M23. But M23 doesn't kill people like Codeco. And Codeco is a partner of the DRC now. The M23 doesn't kill people like FDLR does. The FDLR is within DRC coalition. So we're asking on international community, put aside politics, put aside interest, to look on a human level, to put human on the middle of everything and save lives. So to say this time, no more genocide, no more unnecessary killing of Africa deserves better. And we have a problem in the Congo, lack of leadership. If we had a responsible leadership, we would not have the problem we have today in employment, fraud, we have the embezzlement of public funds. Every single day you hear millions of dollars being taken away by public servants, which are linked with President Tshisekedi. So it isn't a secret at all. So when we're asking the international community to come and intervene, stop this ongoing genocide.
All right, so on the back of that, obviously the annual African Union Summit is currently underway. This week, President Cyril Ramaphosa, several ministers in his cabinet attending the 36th ordinary session of the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government. This is being held in Ethiopia this weekend. He's expected to chair the AU Peace and Security Council and discuss the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. Well, a new bureau of the AU Assembly will also be elected. But for this and more, Dr. Charles Zinkala, independent international relations consultant, joins us for further. Very good afternoon to you, Dr. Charles. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers. Thank you so much for having me.
Dr. Charles, there have been sentiments echoed which point to a crisis of African multilateralism. And when we look at the timing of this AU summit, obviously we see quite a few issues coming to the fore. We have to see the fragile return of peace in northern Ethiopia, widespread instability in the Great Lakes. Macro level, we're seeing the ongoing war in the Ukraine. And it is raising a lot of questions about Africa and where it positions itself to date. What do you think is set to top the agenda this time around?
Thank you very much and for that important question and contribution. You know, it is quite unfortunate that the AU, which turned the Organization of African Unity, has continued to create talk shows without having credible implementation of some policies, even actually bringing up policies which were adopted in 1963 when the AU was formed. You know, policies such as the Inter-Africa Free Trade Agreement, you know, which they claim that they adopted it in 2018. But this, if you look at the AU Charter of 1963, today marks exactly 63, about 60 years when that charter was imposed. But we can see the continued talks of rhetoric talks of claiming and saying they are doing something. Literally, we can see the effect that colonialism and apartheid is alive and well. We do not have the agenda that we fought by 60 years after attaining the so-called colonial independence and apartheid independence. One child can simply ask the question, why are these people calling and claiming of freedom fighters that they fought for our independence? Why are they claiming that they were in absentia and in diaspora and in exile to fight for the freedom that we're enjoying? Where is the freedom that we are enjoying that we can attest to? In fact, one of the people mentioned that if anybody claims that we regained our independence, that we fought the apartheid devil, those people must be arrested because it's a false information. There's only a few countries in the world that can claim independence, such as the United States of America and mostly of European nations. that benefited on the dispensation of colonialism in Africa.
Dr. Charles, speaking about jurisdiction, perhaps even roles and responsibility, there also seems to be some confusion about the responsibilities of the AU versus the regional bloc, the challenges that they faced, just regarding security systems, tackling some of the issues there. But I think with finding a consensus or perhaps finding a solution, one has to question whether the PSC can create a consensual solution. I'm only asking this because we know the big talker of this weekend is the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that's going to be discussed. All these dynamics ultimately are going to impact how that is rolled out.
Yes, indeed. But it's unfortunately, when we talk about the AU and the regional blocs, their capacity to implement policies is none but zero. They've got zero political will and zero economical will in terms of implementing what was agreed upon in 1963. I refer to that date because the agenda for Africa was already established. The Agenda 2063, which has been adopted not very long ago in 2015 by then the AU chairperson Robert Gabriel Mugabe, indicated that by 2063 would have gone by 100 years from the formation of the AU. But the question is, the all organizations of regional blocs and as well as the continental blocs, they are full of talk shows and they are full of policy makers, and they're missing the biggest aspects of the implementers and making sure that they have the needed capacity to ensure that the member states adopt these policies to implement, to make them as law into their individual countries. So the separation of them working in not working in unity has been a major problem. And as well as we're not forgetting about the funding. Who's funding the AU? Who's funding the regional blocs, the SADC, ECOWAS, Central African countries, and many others in the Maghreb? They are being funded by the World Bank. And in fact, the agenda for Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has already been funded by the United Nations to implement. But when you see this liberalization of the market economy,
all right, we seem to be having some technical issues. Let's leave that conversation there. Dr. Charles Singhal, independent international relations consultant, weighing in on the back of the AU summit that's currently underway in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Again, President Cyril Ramaphosa and some cabinet members there in attendance. Thank you to Dr. Charles for his time. Let's leave the conversation there. That's also where we leave the show today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Of course, we're back tomorrow for a look at the week ahead. Until then, do take care and stay safe. From myself, Liesl Wilson, and the rest of the team, it's goodbye for now.